Well, welcome everybody to today's show. Thanks for tuning in. I'm here with Michael and Todd again. And we were just talking about so we did so many episodes of the podcast remotely from our own homes over Zoom, and that worked great, and we loved getting the content out to you guys. But we love this so much more. I'm right here in the flesh with the two of you, right? Before we jump into today's topic, why don't we talk a little bit about how have you guys been coping with COVID? It's still here, it's still around, right? It's not going away anytime soon. So how's your summer been going? I just want to hear a little bit on the personal side of just how you guys are dealing with it, how your families are doing with it.
I think my wife's sick of the kids. They've been home since March.
I think my wife's sick of me.
Yeah. She told me the other day, she's like, I've had enough of you. You've been around the house enough.
My wife was glad for me to get out of the home. I will say that.
Right.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because, when you're at work all the time, you forget. I mean, it's your house. It's your house together.
Right.
But during the day, it's not your house.
Right.
No, it's her house.
It's hers.
We only get the evening.
Right.
And the garage.
And cut the lawn.
Exactly.
I'm just jealous of my kids because when I was 10 years old, I didn't have a 5-month-long summer vacation.
That's true.
That's true.
That's pretty awesome.
That's true. Yeah.
But they get pretty bored.
Yeah. So we're actually navigating what we're gonna do school wise. I mean, you have 3 kids, but we have 1 son, and we're trying to navigate that.
It's tough
and figure out what's gonna be right. So and I know our government's doing the best that they can. Obviously, there's arguments on both sides of what went well, what didn't go well, what's going on. But honestly, I do not envy that job.
No.
Right? And all that pressure.
It's not the day you want to be a teacher.
And lives at stake.
No.
And all of that stuff. So we salute all of you, first responders, teachers, everybody who's putting themselves out there and has to shift. And, I mean, have you tried educating your kids at home? Have you been a part of that at all?
A little bit.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I'm the worst.
They don't listen.
No.
They don't listen to me.
They don't listen to me.
Then I got to get out the no.
Let's not go there.
All right. Well, let's.
I'm not saying that. You just have to meet my kids.
Yeah.
No,
No.
but we're all dealing with it and doing the best that we can. But
I'd like to just shout out to anybody who just does not what they think they want to do, but what they need to do for their fellow brother.
Right.
Yeah.
Shout out to anyone that's doing that.
Yeah, I think we're all making sacrifices.
Yeah,
right now,
we got to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I
agree.
Too much going on right now in this world of everybody. What's good for me?
Right.
We just all need to get along.
Need to keep thinking about our brother.
Yeah.
Serve each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I respect that. Well, today we speaking of respect. No, actually not speaking of that. But today, what we wanted to talk about.
It sounded good.
It did. I was going to say,
whoa, what are you going to drop on
do
us?
I have a segue?
I actually pause it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of being flexible, I guess, what I wanted to talk about today was gear versus skill. Okay, so how many times have we been a part of a church, right, where it's like, man, if we just had this, it would be better? Or how many times have we thought, man, I wish we were that church, right, the big church down the street that has all the gear and all the goodies, and, man, why can't we just get that and do that? We would just be so much better. And so what I wanted to talk about today is when is gear the right thing that you need, and when do you need to grow in your skill of your craft, whether it's in audio mixing, whether it's singing, playing an instrument, speaking, directing video, designing lighting. When is it more about your skill, and when is it right for you to be like, hey, we've kind of maxed out on our gear, we know everything about it, it's time to really get some new gear? But sometimes it's going to be the case where gear is not going to fix everything. Sometimes it's about growing in your craft. So I would love to talk about that with you guys. Todd, you've been doing this for way longer than us. Michael, you, I know, are an audio guru. I know you know more than that, but that's kind of your niche. And so, like, when is it important to invest into yourself and not just invest into equipment or hardware? So let's open up the discussion.
Man, that's a huge topic.
Well, I didn't think about this when we were talking about the subject, but, I've been at this for a very long time. But when it comes to doing something in my church, there's somebody at this table that I ask just about everything, almost to the point of being annoying.
Hey, what would you do?
So I've been at this forever, but I'm sitting next to two guys that are like mixed masters, so far way beyond me that I'm constantly learning. So,
and I think we are.
When do you
too.
quit learning?
We're always learning.
Never.
You never stop learning.
You can never stop.
All right,
you can't get better at your trade.
Well, let me open up
anyway.
with this for me. When it comes to the audio side, obviously, I know tons about video, but I am not. You shouldn't hire me to be your video guy.
Right.
Okay, at any organization. Could I do it? I could probably figure it out. But there are guys way better than me, And so all I want to say with that is, like, I do say that I am an audio engineer, right? Like, that is, like, how I identify myself when it comes to a craft. But I also invest into that like crazy. Like, I have my own subscriptions to different things, whether it's mixed with the masters or, I have all these plugins that I subscribe to. I'm always working on projects. I'm always watching videos. I'm always talking with somebody like Michael. Man, how do you approach low end? How do you do this? How do you do that? And really putting yourself out there in order to grow. That's the only way you grow, is to kind of put yourself in uncomfortable situations.
Absolutely.
And so it's been so important to my growth. Can you speak into that a little bit yourself, Michael, and like how you've done that and how you've kind of gotten better at what you do?
Yeah. Well, I started out 15 years ago, and, I just dove into everything, anything I could eat up. It was any kind of information. And mainly it's like getting yourself around the people that are better than you.
Right.
That's how you really strengthen your skills.
Absolutely.
So I sought out, high-end engineers. I wanted to learn from the masters that have gone before me. And then you take those techniques or skills that they have learned, you apply it, adapt it, make it your own, practice. In my journey, it was early on, ear training was a big deal. And there were certain frequencies that were very easy for me to hear at first, but there was other ones I had to work at. And once I learned how to train my ear in those certain frequencies, then it was a piece of cake.
Right.
But I did have to go through a learning process, and this has nothing to do with gear. It's all about skill.
Yeah, but you can buy an audio analyzer that'll tell you that.
You could. I think that's
So I'm going to learn that. I can just get an analyzer. It'll tell me exactly.
A lot of times when I was...
I can get a little app on my phone right now that'll show me that. What do I need to learn that for?
Get on your Apple Watch, too.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So I would go through all these little procedures, and learn every aspect of it. I spent months on learning how to hear compression.
Right.
How to hear it is
right.
not what it does, but like how to hear what it's doing. And that's a huge thing. And learning all the different. You can't hear it. There's no point. What are you doing?
Why are you using it?
Yeah. You can watch the meters all day long, but when it comes down to it, you got to hear this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with you on the mentor side. When I first started out, it was the same thing. I worked at studios for free. I served at my church. I learned from everybody, from the person who was at the lowest level yet above me. I learned from that person, and then I learned from the person who was saying things that I didn't understand, and I was just like, oh, yeah. But then it, like, clicked 3 years later kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that sort of revelation. And so, and everything in between. And so I totally agree with you, man. I have to shout out that there have been times where I've just spent minimal amounts of times with people. And when I was working out in Seattle, we brought out Lincoln Brewster several times to our church. And so I was the support for Lee Fields. Lee is a great audio engineer. Look up to him, man. And, yeah, he's phenomenal. I really love him and his temperament and everything. But I got to learn so much from him, not even talking to him, but just watching him and his process and how, like, when he got to a place and he would get the PA ready for their sounds, for their set, he would be playing certain tracks because he knew exactly what he was going for. And there were things that I picked up from that. And there were things that he would do with the snare drum or with the kick, with one microphone on each element, by the way. It wasn't like he had like this whole array of things. And he would do this all on a Yamaha console. And it would be phenomenal.
Of course it would.
Of course, right?
Yeah.
And again, and this is, he's not using an SSL console. He's not using a $100,000, $200,000 console. It was like a $30,000, $40,000 console, and it sounded phenomenal. And that's a great example of how somebody with skill can really just knock it out of the park, no matter what he's using.
Well, and I think when you're developing and you're beginning this journey, and we're talking specifically of audio, but this relates to
everything,
every trade that's out there.
Yeah.
I walked into Willow Creek, and I stayed for 8 months. I didn't leave. I was like a lost puppy, and I just hung around the stage and started plugging things in. Scott Ragsdale was one of my main mentors. I learned a lot from that guy.
He's amazing.
Scott, you're awesome.
We love you.
And, the biggest thing that I learned probably from him is that, you're never too good to learn. Like, as good as Scott was at that time, there were still times where he's like, hey, what do you think of the toms? I'm like, yeah, it sounds great. And I was a young rookie, so I'd throw my 2 cents in there, but, and he would listen,
right. At least take it into
At
account.
least take it in and invite you into the process, know, and that's, I think, holding your skills loosely after you become experienced and seasoned, give those skills away.
There can't be any ego in the process.
There is no ego.
No ego. I mean, you know when you're right, but it's like, use your skills, use your ears, right? It's like a lot of times, especially with digital consoles today, we use our eyes, right? Like, this is what my kick EQ is supposed to look like, right? Versus like, what sounds good, right? Well, what if the mic's not in the same place? That EQ doesn't mean anything at that point. But so, I mean, moving away from audio, and saying like this applies to everything, right? Yeah.
So isn't it interesting? The two sound engineers in the room are right away talking about how great they hear and skill and skill. I mean, no one's said anything about the tools that we have today that we didn't have before.
That's absolutely right.
You remember the first mixer I ever saw had knobs this big, okay, and there was like 4 of them, high, mid, low, and a gain and a. It wasn't even a fader at that point. It was a turn knob.
Right.
I think the first thing I mixed on was what's that? What they call that thing? The Sure, man. A couple of column speakers and a package amp with big knobs on. Vocal Master. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
There you go.
So. Like in junior high, I mixed on it.
I don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
Teach me.
Anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the tools, we have tools.
And
I mean, I'm not
disagreeing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, a lot of churches, we're dealing with an array of skill levels, right? When we, so you might have a vocalist who's a professional, and then you might have a vocalist who's still learning, and then you have everything in between, right? And so dynamics is a huge thing. And now with digital consoles, being able to have a compressor to help control things right on that input is huge, right?
Well, and
it could be a great tool.
Let's get real. Like, all the tools out there today similarly do the same thing. Yes, some do it better than others. Some sound better than others, but the tools are still there on every console.
The tools are amazing.
On modern consoles. So when it puts it on a level playing field, now it gets down to skill.
Boom. And that's what we're talking about. Getting away from the, hey, if I just have the next thing, and I think society has played a part in this as well. It's not just, the church or organizations or businesses that are saying, hey, we need the next greatest. I mean, we're all that way. You know, every time an iPhone comes out, I'm like, I need that new iPhone.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Every time a new 2 years after I buy my car, I'm like, man, I'm tired of this car. I want a different car. Right? And so I think that's part of it as well. But I think you're right. I think we do have to examine whether or not gear is always the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or if it's, hey, do I need to bring somebody in to train my team?
There's a whole nother aspect of this, and it doesn't just apply to churches. It applies to any industry.
Yeah.
If you put the greatest tools in front of a guy who has no idea how to use them, what good are they?
Right.
Or vice versa.
Right.
Right? You give the guy that's got all the skill in the world, and you don't give him the tools to do his job. I mean, if you take
that's true.
However, that
if you take a NASCAR mechanic, right, and put him in a garage with a screwdriver and a hammer, what good is he?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure he can figure something out, but yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
You're not using them to his full capacity, right?
So I think the key is matching. You know, and even not even in the church industry. If I go into a business of some sort and I create the most wonderful application for a conference room, right? I mean, it's got all the bells. Touch panels are a great example of this. I could give somebody a Crestron touch panel in just a really cool room with all the bells and whistles. But if you can't walk in there and make the thing work, it's nothing more than a waste of money.
Right.
So being able to match, and that's part of our job, right, is to match the product to your skill level and to help teach you and bring you along. But you know, I love the whole thing about teaching yourself. We all did it. You guys did it more behind the console. You know, I did it by installing systems.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody ever had to tell me to. And I think it's kind of a fleet. We probably shouldn't get on this schedule on this whole topic.
Yeah, you should.
You know, back in the day, I mean, I learned from some great people, but that didn't replace. I remember when we made the transition to digital. I mean, there wasn't 100 people around to teach me how a digital processor worked. You know, when I went from a third octave EQ to something in a box, you know, there wasn't, this is new stuff. I would take it home. I mean, I get down at the end of the day, I had to put this thing in the next day and make it work in a church. I'd throw the thing in my car, I'd take it home, and when I'm sitting there watching the ball game at night, right, I'm plugging and playing and pushing buttons and figuring the whole thing out.
Right.
On my own time.
Putting in the work.
Absolutely.
I didn't get paid for that. I didn't ask for overtime.
That's that sweat equity.
Learning your trade.
Right.
I did that recently with a new console. Brought it home, had it on my kitchen table. You know, I had to learn the ins and outs of it. So,
what console was it?
I don't want to mention.
Okay, sounds
So
good.
here's another thing
It's
I thought of. Why don't you want to mention that? It's an amazing tool.
It is. It's great.
It's an amazing tool.
There's applications for all things today.
But you know what? If you take that tool and put it in my church, we'd be completely lost.
Right.
It's more tool than what we have, you know. Which brings me up to something, or a thought I had when you were speaking, you know, about learning from people who have the experience and people you look up to and everything else. So interesting thing happened in our church. So our technical director, or our worship director, sorry, we don't have a technical director. He's both. He was not a real equipment guy, right? He wasn't a mix guy. I introduced our worship director to a digital mixer. I'm the one who showed him how the thing works, right? And you guys know my skill level is moderate at best, and I don't mix a lot. So I kind of got him started. But then COVID hit, right? And he all of a sudden had to do live stream, and he was creating a studio in his home. And in 2 months, right, he went from a guy that kind of knew what a mixer worked and relied on me to help him, right? So he was at my skill level. He was way below mine, right? He went home, and in 2 months, now I see him. I walk up to the console. I'm like, dude, what is that? What's going on? That verb is amazing. Where'd you come up with that?
I like
the
that.
student has become the master.
Exactly. It was an amazing transformation. So here, you're talking about looking at guy, but even people who, you know, they get you started on a path, and it's an amazing thing to watch. You can learn from people who
Well,
are
don't
not
be,
at a
yeah,
skill level above you.
absolutely.
And that's what the guy that you were speaking, I forgot his name. What was it?
Scott
Ragsdale. Yeah.
Ragsdale.
He'd bring you into that conversation because
Yeah.
he knew the value of getting opinions from other people.
Hey,
Yeah.
by the way,
So-
a side note, if you need great documentaries to watch, Scott is a great resource for what documentary you should
Yes.
watch. Yep. Very inspirational. I love
So,
it. I love
gear
that guy.
versus skill.
Yeah, gear versus
Are
skill.
we talking 50-50
I
here?
think skill's winning so far.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, all right. So, for example, for me, with the first church I ever mixed at had the Mackie 16, the VLZ.
Oh,
1604.
not that
1604, the VLZ, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's all we had, man. That it was like a 100-person church, and the guy who was he's a great guy. He actually mentored me in more areas than one, but he just kind of wanted to get out of it, and so he was like, "Let me just train up somebody else."
He had
But I was
ulterior motives.
but I was
I'm
already
sick of doing this.
I was already friends with everybody in the worship band, right? We were all like, it was all young people and young adults,
Right.
and so it just made sense, and I kind of took it from there. But that's where I started. There was no digital, there was no nothing. All you had was a little Ford. How many EQs was on the VLZ? You had like a high pass and a
High.
low pass,
Parametric mid.
and then two
Parametric mid,
maybe one
probably.
parametric
Yeah.
mid, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Man,
Sweepable mid.
sweepable
Call
mid.
that.
Yeah.
Parametric.
Yeah, and I think
What's
it was the
that?
version
Yeah.
that had the
I guess it
effects
wasn't
on it. It might have had
sweepable.
like some reverb on it that you could
Yeah.
put in. I can't remember. Maybe that's a different one.
No, I think you're close.
Yeah.
I think it had.
Yeah.
yeah, it had a little
Something like
something,
that.
something.
That wasn't a spring
right.
for you old guys.
Yeah, and so
Clang.
like that's where I started from, and you just kind of work your way up from there, and slowly but surely, you just dedicate yourself over and over again to it, and you learn along the way. And I'm sure it was very similar for both of you. I mean, Todd, you said I don't know if it was in a separate episode, but you started off as an installer for PAs, correct?
Yeah.
Right, and then you grew into being able to engineer and design. Like I now am leaning on you, right, coming into this role at Parkway. I can't tell you how many countless times both of you have helped me with designs for speaker systems and that sort of thing. What was that process like for you to learn and just kind of, you weren't depending on equipment or even computers. You were actually doing math.
Yeah, but I relied a lot on, not a lot, almost. I mean, we had some great guys that went before me that I learned from, right? I mean, I started off as an electrician, so that was my knowledge base. So everything I had to learn. But even then, we used to learn it wasn't quite as easy as Googling something or pull it up on a, watch somebody and get there. It took more. I mean, I lived at the feet of as many engineers, speaker engineers, as I could find. The kind of cool thing, Electro Voice, little company that was, an hour from down in Buchanan, Michigan. I knew a lot of guys there, and I watched them build stuff, and I, talked to those guys whenever I had that opportunity to understand how audio works, the physics of it,
Right.
and you build on that. So it's a good base. You got to have a base, and you build on that, and you learn that from people.
Yeah.
Hey, tell
that's-
us the story of how Evie got its name, real quick. I
I
find it very fascinating.
Yeah, it's. I
don't know
hope this
this.
is right.
I don't know
I know I
this.
was told this.
Okay.
The electric voice.
Yeah.
So I think it was.
Sorry, I put you on the
What was
spot
it?
there.
You did. What was the dude's
it
name?
Notre
The
Dame?
football coach.
Was it
Yeah, Notre Dame. Is that Newt Rodney?
I don't know. The football coach at Notre Dame. Go on.
Yeah. Hit it in the comments if
Golly,
you guys know.
Someone go. See, this is what happens when you get old.
tell
man.
us in
It's
the
just like
comments,
crazy
guys.
Things just blank out of your mind. So yeah, he needed to address his football team. This is how I was told. So they had to create. They created a sound system, and it was called. Gosh, what is the guy's name? Someone call me. No one knows my number. Anyway, this is a delayed pot. We're not live. We can't do that.
We're not live. We're
Help
not
me,
live.
Do I need to Google it?
And
yeah,
so,
anyway, so they called it his electric voice, and that's where Electro Voice was born.
born from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from those guys.
And sometimes it's inspiration like that just kind of rings, right, out of nowhere.
Why is that pertinent to anything we're talking about?
I don't know, because you said Evie.
You said EV? Did
and
you
it
say
triggered a
EV?
memory.
It triggered a memory for you.
It
Well,
was just a great bunch of people who invented a ton of technology and loudspeakers that we
Yeah.
still, patents that they hold is incredible. And there's a lot of great people that I could mention that I learned from down there in doing that kind of thing. So it's certainly knowledge, but it's also the ability to want that knowledge. You got to be a sponge, really.
Yes.
And I think it's in any industry.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here, because obviously the mix that I would put together for, say, a 16-channel band, with vocalists and all that on a Mackie VLZ is totally different than what I'm doing today on any digital console. It is night and day, right? And so where does gear come into play?
I think it's huge.
Yeah.
The things we do today are we couldn't do. I mean, that stupid little digital chip changed everything.
Right. Imagine having, say it's just 16 channels, but imagine having a compressor on every channel back in the day, in the analog days, having a gate on every channel. Think about the racks of space that you would need in order to be able to do that, right?
It wasn't that long ago.
It really wasn't.
It was not
What,
that long
20,
ago.
30 years ago? 30 years ago. Easy.
Yeah. Well, 10 years ago, I was still hauling racks
1990?
around.
Is that 1990?
Well, it's because it was out. It just wasn't affordable.
Right.
It became affordable,
Right.
Yeah.
and now we're using it.
Right.
But there's still the fundamentals of skill, working with
Yes.
a band, know.
Yes.
Whether it's digital or analog,
Right.
you can't change.
I still, one of my best.
Can't change physics.
Right. Right.
It's still the same. It's just
Still the same thing.
Personally, one of my best gigs that I just absolutely loved was this school theater in Alma, Michigan. And I was hired to run sound for a band, and I had two Mackie powered 450s as mains, and I positioned them in a certain way that it would be.
Yes, he said Mackie, everybody.
that's the second time that's
yeah.
come up.
Yeah.
It would actually
Guess we're doing a
be
shout out
best
to
for
Mackie.
the acoustics of the room.
Yeah.
So I kind of worked with the speaker placement to get to sound the best in the room.
Yeah.
And I also had a TAC Scorpion mixing console, 24 channel, which was made by AMEC. So it was a pretty sweet analog console.
Really?
Yeah. Not a lot of outboard gear.
Mm-hmm.
I think I may add a couple compressors and one reverb unit that I plugged in. But the band was phenomenal. I mean, they were all top.
Wait a minute.
That's
You mean
half-
it's not
top.
That's half
You
the
know?
process.
It's not just up to us.
It's
No.
not up to us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We got to have good talent.
Yes.
But I had such limited gear that working with the musicians, stage placement, microphone placement, speaker placement, working with the acoustics in the room,
Yeah.
all that played into it. And I had people coming up saying, "Thank you, it sounded amazing,"
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's
you
where
don't
the
get that
skill
very
comes in.
often,
That's where
you
the
know.
skill comes in, right?
So
Over and over again, you go and you do something, right? Like maybe you're
Yeah.
a guest somewhere, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, what did you do?
right,
And again, it's the time you put in, it's the hours, it's the sweat equity that I talk about that is so important. But you need gear.
You need the
Gear
tools.
does make things better.
now if I had a Digico in that environment, I mean,
Would have smashed it.
would have smashed it,
Would have
of course.
smashed it. Yeah.
and some better speakers.
And some better speakers. Yeah. Yeah.
So you remember, I don't know why this popped into my head. You remember the clip, the Back to the Future, when Michael J.
I
Fox
just watched it.
jumps into that in the auditorium, the high school dance, right?
Yeah.
And he just rips this guitar,
Yeah.
and everyone's like, and then at the end, what does he say? I guess you guys weren't ready for that.
Yeah. He's like, but your kids are going to love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's so good.
gotta
Speaking
be
of
right
Back
for
to the
that.
Future, I love the part at the beginning.
Oh, boy, did I do it now.
The very beginning where he walks in and Doc in his like little room, he has like that huge speaker,
Oh yeah,
right? And he plugs his electric guitar into it and it like blows him away. It's the best. Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah,
need to
so-
invent something like that.
But on that,
Damn,
another
they
note,
did.
I mean, how many times have you come to me, back to the gear or skill,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right, and said, I was at this church, and we won't mention any names, of course, to protect the innocent, but, you walk up to a console, and the first thing you do is just start turning off all the plugins.
Oh yeah,
It's like, what is coming out of this
Yeah.
thing? And just start turning them off. Our plugins, great.
of course they
Waves,
are.
I mean, shout out to Waves. These guys are
Love
doing some
'em.
amazing work,
Love,
right?
love everything. Yeah.
But if you don't have the skill, if you don't have the knowledge and the understanding of how to use that correctly, it just becomes a nuisance, right?
I agree.
You can make it as bad or good.
More is
right?
not better.
Always.
in my opinion.
Right.
So you put a
Keep it
novice,
simple.
you
Keep
put
it
a
simple.
novice in front of a digital console and say, just have at it, man, and go at it. You're gonna make. You could wreck a lot of good,
Mm-hmm.
right?
You
Like
kill
put a
you-
good musician up there on just a
Yep.
little analog board,
Yep.
right? And your skill levels there, you could probably do pretty good. You give him a digital board and he starts diving into compressors and EQs and everything.
Yeah.
You could turn it into
get
garbage
lost.
in a hurry.
I think
right?
that's a
So-
big problem, though, and maybe Michael, you might want to speak into this. Is everybody, like, for example, you could buy is it Mercury or the Diamond bundle? Which one's the top? It's one of those,
Yeah.
right?
Mercury, I
All
think.
of a sudden, you have like 500 plugins,
Oh yeah.
right? How many compressors? And
you
don't.
should absolutely use every one of them all at once.
Yes, yeah. Well, my thing
Just
is
keep
that
pushing buttons till it sounds good.
you have so many options that you don't know one
Yeah.
that well.
Right.
And so my recommendation for people is like, hey man, just grab a couple and only use those for like 6 months and really learn how they sound and how they impact whatever you're using them for.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, I love my C6. I love the F6. I'm a big fan of the Slate Digital, you know, plugins. Isotope has great ones, you know, on and on and on. But if you have too many options, you become a master of none of them, right?
Absolutely.
And so speak into that a little bit, Michael.
Well, I use my personal console that I use on a regular basis is the Avid S6L. So use a lot of the Avid plugins, which is fine, you know. But the tools that are on board, most of these consoles are phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, I think the plugins just enhance it just a touch more.
Right,
You know,
right. It gives you
so
like 2% or 5%
You
more
really got to
percent.
learn to use the board first.
Mm.
You know, I've walked into several churches now where they're using either a Midas or a Digico S31, you know, and they've got this huge plug-in suite. They got 9 plugins running on every single vocal channel.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh my
it
goodness.
just sounds mushy,
Or
you know.
Or they got all this going on. The pastor walks up and they turn his mic on 3 words into the first sentence. Right?
Yeah.
Completely blow the
Right.
cue.
Yeah. If you're missing cues, man, start there, please.
Yes, that's
That
a
was
skill.
drilled into my head.
That's a
Do
too.
they have an
skill thing.
auto cue?
Yeah.
Is there a plug-in for an auto
Take
cue?
notes. Take notes. I mean, we have Planning Center. You have printouts
Yes.
of what's coming up. Like, just take notes.
Yeah, you should know when that's coming.
Right.
Um,
But you were saying.
So I've come into guest mix and, you know, I turn to the wave screen and I just start turning things off.
Yep.
You know, it's like off.
And it comes back to life.
And it's just like the whole PA just comes back to life.
Yep.
You know, and
Yep.
but that's not to say that waves are bad
No.
at all.
Not at all.
You know, but I'm a minimalist plugin user.
Yeah.
I love my plugins, but I'm not using countless, you know.
You know, I'll bet you the difference is like when you turn on a plug-in, if you turn on something that just all of a sudden makes something come to life, my guess your first thought is like, what is that?
Mm.
How does that work?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
What did I just do? I know I did something that sounds better, but what did it really do?
Right.
Right? You want to know.
You want to
wanna
know the
examine
why.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the difference probably comes in.
But I
Yeah.
think that's learning those individual tools one at a time, you know, mastering that one plugin, the C6,
Right.
you know, mastering the
Use it
the-
on everything.
the R-comp, you know, mastering the onboard compressor.
Right. Even if it's like the Renaissance reverb, whatever.
I don't care. It doesn't matter,
Just
you know?
master the one thing.
Master the one thing and
Right.
move on.
And
you
move
know.
on, right? And then you know when to bring it out of your
Yeah.
toolbox.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, and, you know, like gating is, you know,
Mm.
sounds very different. It's a very utilitarian thing, but
There are
you
good
know,
gates, bad
they're good
gates. Some
gates
are
and bad
smoother
gates,
than
you know.
others, right?
Avid does a pretty good job, but I wouldn't say their gate on their S6L is the best,
Right.
you know.
Right.
Whereas I've jumped on an SSL console
Oh, forget about it.
and it was like, wow, this is the best gate I've ever heard. You know, I
Right.
don't think I've ever spoken those words out of my mouth out of any other console. You
Or
know,
about gates.
or about gates in general.
Right.
Well, and then the tools. You know,
Yeah.
I remember when you told me, I don't know what console we're on. Again, everyone, I'm a novice user here. This is you can trigger a gate now from an actual frequency.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
boom.
Oh yeah.
All of a sudden, it's like, oh wow, I know what I could do with that. I know what I could do with that.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
could take the fundamental frequency of a low tom, and that will
Exactly.
trigger your drum.
It will
opening
only
every
trigger.
time.
Instead
Right.
of trying to get my gate exactly perfect, so the
Yeah.
drum next to it doesn't gate the drum on the other side, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's
Or trigger it
great
right
about
on. It's
plugins
amazing.
and gear and new
Just blew my
consoles.
mind.
Right
So.
there, that can be
Yeah.
a huge benefit to churches or
course.
to any live event, right?
But if you don't know what a gate does and it never comes on or goes off, it ain't
Right.
going to do you
Yeah.
much good.
Well, and again, so we're coming back to the skill. You can have the most amazing L acoustics rig in your auditorium, but if you have a hearing problem and you can't hear like high end, anything above 5K, for example, or 4K, it's probably not going to sound good.
How about a seeing
But it's
problem?
not the PA's fault. My problem is
You and
not
I
the
have
PA's
talked
fault.
about some people have seeing problems, right? They're sitting there behind the console, and you see a drummer doing this, and you don't hear anything.
You don't hear it. No.
you got a seeing problem.
Or you see the electric player just going.
yeah, having a
Right,
great
yeah.
time.
And
He's
you don't hear
ripping it,
any
and you're like,
electric.
You know, a good
Oh.
study of that is back in college.
You told me this.
we had a whole
This is great
class.
story. Yeah.
We had a whole class on dissecting the sound of a movie. So we had to take a 15-minute Monsters Inc. clip and recreate all the sounds that we saw.
Really?
So
I like this.
in Pro Tools, we go ahead and we did all the dialogue. We had one of our lab students that did the voice for Mike,
Yeah.
and then I worked on a lot of like the footsteps, and you had to think about the wind noise and the movement of the clothing and the car, shutting the door, turning the keys.
What's missing, right?
And the whole thing was to drive home as if you see a sound, you need to hear a sound.
Wow.
So, I don't know, for all you out there, dissect some of the sound effects in movies. You know, Wall-E is a good.
Because there's no dialogue.
There's no dialogue in the first 30 minutes. Or I think it's longer, maybe the first hour of
It's a
Wall-E,
long time.
The movie is told by the sound effects.
and it is
If they weren't there,
fascinating.
you would.
Every little
I love
nuance,
that movie.
every little nuance between the cockroach and the
Yeah.
rockets. I mean, the wind
Yeah.
noise, all that stuff is really.
And then the
it's really
Eva,
fascinating to
the
me. Yep.
alien thing
Yeah.
that comes down, and
But the personality and how they use sound to create the story, and that, when I'm mixing sound, like you were saying, Todd, if I see that ride, I definitely want to hear that ride,
right. Right.
So,
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I don't know how long we're going to go with this yet. I got to say one quick thing.
go for it.
I got to help out all small churches, right, with volunteer staff. Okay, stop looking when you're looking for sound guys to run your console. Okay, stop looking for the guy that is more than willing to push the button. Okay, because that's not what you want.
Right.
You want the guy that really knows nothing about the button, right? But has trained his ear. Musicians, get your high school band students, get anyone that's been involved on the musical side of things that has used their ears, because you can teach people, and they got to have they have to have the desire. But I can't tell you how many churches I walk into that the guys that are behind the consoles are like electrical engineers.
Right.
They're IT guys. They're like people. I'm not saying that's bad. I should be careful how I say this.
weren't you an electrical engineer?
I was.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
I
just
was.
checking.
Not an engineer. I was an electrician.
Oh yeah,
I
okay.
got shocked too many times. Anyway, look for people
could
that have
tell.
a little musical background.
Yeah,
You can learn the knob, but a lot of times it's difficult to learn what you're hearing.
yeah. I wouldn't say that musicians. You have to be a musician to mix sound,
No,
but it
sometimes
certainly helps.
it does help, but I've also seen it not help.
Yeah,
Right, because sometimes they're so focused in on like their particular
Right.
instrument, but yeah, over time, this is the bottom line. If you're going to be a mixer, you need to be musical.
absolutely.
And what
Yeah.
happens is
Doesn't
a
have
lot
to be a musician, but
No,
it has to
right.
be someone that
Musical.
appreciates
Musical.
music. You could be sitting home every night listening to music. I don't
Right.
care. You have to have done something in your life that helps you with your ear. If you played in
art.
if you sing in the high school choir, you're going to know what pitch means.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You're analyzing things around you, because it's one of the senses we never get. I don't want to go off on a whole tangent.
No,
here.
it's good. It's
But if
great.
you think of all of our senses, the one that we're never taught in school no one tells us how sound works.
Right.
We learn how to see, we read, we enhance all of our senses, but hearing is something that's not really
It's assumed.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
No, I
look
totally
for
agree with
people
you.
that, that guy that's always wanting to listen to music, that guy that's, in a band or even could be a high school band, if they play an instrument,
Right.
anything that gives
And-
them some ear training that they're used to,
And I know
it's a good starting point.
I know exactly what you mean, Todd, and so I just want to bring some clarity to what you said earlier. Like, I want to be careful how I say this. So I know somebody who is an electrical engineer, is a bassist, and is a great mixing front of house guy at a church. Okay, he does it volunteer. He has great bass tone. You would love him, man.
Yeah.
But we also know other engineers who may have been on our team, and they were horrible. Okay, or other musicians, and they were horrible. And so it's not a one and done. Just because
Right.
you can play an instrument means you can mix.
And I'm talking about when you're finding them brand new people.
Right.
Okay.
Who to invest into, who to recruit.
There's a lot of people that aren't afraid to push buttons. They may not be the best engineer.
Right.
You
right,
might
right.
be better off finding someone with a decent ear who has trained their ear a little bit and then teach them how to run the knobs.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do for a lot of churches is I always, whenever I do a training for a church when it comes to audio, I always talk about how you need to focus on being musical first. If I focus on trying to make you a good audio engineer first, you're going to get caught up in looking at the EQ and the frequencies and all of these things, the compression, the ratios and the threshold and all of that. But if I can set up some good templates for you, or at least help you out with sound check on rehearsal night, on Sunday, you can focus on the faders and the musicality of it and the musical aspect of it, following the band. Where are they going? What are they doing? Transitions, making sure mics are on when we transition from music to announcements or comments or preaching or whatever the case is. Make sure it's musical. If it's not musical, then you're not really getting it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
The board is a musical instrument.
Right.
It's working with the musicality of it.
Right.
And following the band.
Right.
Dynamics,
Dynamics. Yeah.
big deal. What's
And
happening? What's going on out there?
And this topic
So
lends itself so much to audio, though. Right.
It does.
But
Right.
this goes to
It's the
every
same thing with
aspect
video.
with lighting or with video. Yes, you got to learn the craft, because you could have the best cameras, $100,000 switcher, multi-campus, but if you don't know the art of directing and producing something,
Well, and if you're a camera guy, do you understand light?
not only that, but do you understand movement?
Right.
How to do a great pan, like a push shot, or you zooming out, or whatever the case is, whatever you're looking for. Like, man, I had this one guy who was a volunteer for me at a church I worked at. This guy was he used to work in Mexico as a camera operator. That was his full-time job, and the shots this guy would get, I was like, I didn't even know you could do that. And he's just using the same camera that every other volunteer is using, but he just had this feel
Right.
and this instinct of what was coming, and he could just anticipate. And that's skill with the same camera that the person, another person is using that same exact camera, but isn't capable of getting those shots.
So
There
if
was
if I walk into your church and there's little red dots next to all the faders on your board,
You mean
have you ever
peeking?
seen that?
Peeking?
No.
Oh, I
Think of an analog core. I used to walk in these churches and every fader had a little orange stick-on dot,
Don't go over this.
Yeah.
and you go, what? Well, that's where that needs to be. I'm like, really? And the board is just covered with labels everywhere. Everything has got a mark and there's a big sign that on the top of it that says "Don't move anything."
Right.
Don't move anything.
Or they lock it.
Yeah.
They lock it up.
Exactly.
Or
Yeah.
something. Like, you can only touch these 3 faders. Everything else don't touch.
Take
Right.
out a screw of the casing and put some metal in front of the master
They used to
faders.
build over top of all the EQs and everything, and all you could get at was the faders on top. Right? Anyway, it doesn't happen as
Yeah.
much anymore. With
All right,
digital.
guys.
Now you just put a password in.
And then you're all set. Well, let me
right.
tell you this. Let me ask you this. So verdict. Skill versus gear.
Oh, skill.
Skill?
All day long.
Skill all day long.
Skill.
Skill. I would say skill as well. But how important is gear?
In the hands of a master, very important.
Right. Right.
But fundamentals need to be learned.
Right. Well, let me put it to you this way. Say you're an organization that has analog equipment, haven't quite upgraded yet. I mean, it's very hard to find nowadays, but it still exists.
It does.
How important is it to upgrade your gear at that point?
I would say very important
Yeah,
because it can actually improve the life of your PA too.
right.
We've had a number of times when we swapped out even older digital consoles. You know, the old tried and true M7. Every time we swap that out with, let's say a D Live or something, the PA just comes to life.
Right.
So there is benefits to
And thank
the
you,
quality.
Yamaha, for the M7. by
Yes,
the
thank
way.
you.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not trashing by
no,
any means.
absolutely. I think
When you're
at
talking
one time it was the highest selling
Absolutely.
digital console in the late 2000s.
And thank you,
early
Mackie, for the
2010s.
1604 VLZ.
Yeah.
But you're talking 20-year-old technology. I mean, if you're talking on a 20-year-old cell phone, it's kind of the same deal.
Right. Right.
There's just newer technology out that processes the signal better. There's higher resolution. Most of these consoles are 96 kilohertz,
Right.
which for those of you that don't understand that, it's like going from standard definition TV to 4K
Right.
to your ears.
Well, and I do want to
so-
make this one point right here
yeah.
for you too, as well, is that so say we're mixing on a B grade or a C grade PA, right? In the hands of a novice, it's probably going to sound
Okay.
but in the hands of a master, you're going to get the most you can out of that PA.
Right.
But if you had an A grade PA, it's going to sound even better, right?
Right.
That's just going to happen.
Yeah.
And we don't have to mention brands, but we can mention like A, B, and C. Like it's just going to do.
Just
A Ferrari versus a Pinto. I mean, they're just miles apart. They are way on each side of the spectrum.
The skills
but
required.
a great console doesn't sound any better through a bad PA.
Right.
Yes.
Keep that in mind.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
The speaker
There's
guy,
lots
speakers
of
come
variables.
first, right?
Yeah. Speakers do come
Good
first.
PA first.
Well, that's the foundation, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Yes. Yes, I would agree. Any final thoughts on gear versus skill, guys?
My thought is match it. Try to stay matched.
Yeah,
right?
on both.
I think it's
Exactly. You give the right tool to the right guy.
There has to be enough of a path moving forward for skill
Yeah.
in order to move your people forward and your vision forward.
Yeah, when I
So,
saw
yeah,
the
when you
like
say
you
match,
said when you
that's a good
started,
idea. Yeah.
when you said the wing in the beginning,
Yeah.
and we looked at that thing together when it first came out, and it's just like this thing does some crazy things for the price point and everything. It was amazing.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
For what you-
Absolutely impressed
It
for the
just
price
blew
point.
my mind, and it's
Yeah.
like, but you put that in my church,
Yeah.
we're not going to get any value
much.
out of it. Yeah, it's too much, more than
Mhm.
we could comprehend at that time.
Right, right.
So,
I always felt that way. Like when we were talking about any church that I worked at, I always had to think about. You were the audio engineer at the church you worked at, right, Michael? I did that for one church, but a few other churches I worked at, I was the technical director and just led volunteers. And so my job was to not mix, not do a function, but to lead those teams and so train other people. So whenever we talked about a new console, I had to keep that in mind. I couldn't get the most complicated thing that sounded amazing, right, for volunteers who mixed 12 times a year, 15 times a year max. And so you always have to keep, like you said, the skill along with the gear. They should match each other to a certain extent. You don't want to overwhelm.
You always
people.
want something that's volunteer friendly.
Right.
However, there's going to be a learning curve with any piece of gear that you buy.
Agreed.
And I think that's where your integrator can help you too. If you have, like, Christian and I are both experienced audio engineers. So if we sell a console to a customer, we're there teaching them how to operate that thing.
We'll do a
and
training.
we'll do it multiple times if
Yep.
we have to.
Absolutely.
And your job is to make sure that you're providing the right console. If you go in
Yeah.
there and sell them a $50,000 digital console, to a church that is just learning, they just started their praise team.
Yeah.
It's like that may be the greatest mixer out there, but it's the wrong tool for that particular church.
Or if it's just like a piano and like a 5-person ensemble.
But I also have some churches that will bring me in quarterly just to refresh their volunteers.
Yeah.
So leadership can invest in their volunteers with bringing in experience, skill.
Yes.
And moving the ball the next, line.
Yeah, I'm doing that
So-
actually next month. In August, I'm going back to a church that we did an install for back in earlier this year. I think it was in February. And we already did a training with their team, and now we're going to do another set of trainings for their people. It's going to be an 8-hour day. We're going to make it worth their while. But that's part of the process. Like, look, you got great gear. You got a great PA. Now let's just get your skill level up to a new place. So.
Yeah. And it's good to get those trainings in spread out as well, because it gives them an opportunity to kind of practice what they learned.
Yeah.
And then you take it to the next
Practice.
level.
Practice?
Yes.
Practice. Yeah.
Yeah.